Welcome, Ghosties and Ghoulies, to a special edition of Sub Horror Shorts, where I narrate a small, allegedly true horror story from random Reddit users mostly, but for the very first time, a subscriber. This is so exciting. But not only is he a subscriber, he is a great friend, and you might have already seen him on my channel just about last month when we did a collaboration together, Lakota from MYR Mediums. He submitted to me his true horror story, so I am here to read it just in time for our spooky season. Enjoy! Part of this story feels like it happened ages ago, and yet some parts are so fresh in my mind that they could have happened just last week. When I was 16, going on 17, so the summer of 2005, I went to a church camp. I wasn't exactly a camper or a counselor, I was just kind of there. I had friends that were counselors, and some of my family were campers, so I was just bored and figured I would tag along to help where I could and enjoy the outdoors. Overall, it was a really fun experience. The weather was wonderful that whole week, and I met some really fun people. There was one development, though, that stained the entire trip for me. And I still find it not necessarily hard, but strange to talk about. Our first day at camp, I was introduced to one of our cabin mates. I'm going to call him Tommy. Tommy was a 12 or 13-year-old kid who came from a family that had some deep issues. For example, Tommy's younger brother, also a camper that week, had scars all over his head that Tommy had allegedly put there 2 years prior with a ball-peen hammer. Even on the first day, Tommy was starting to make a name for himself as the cabin butthole. He was abrasive, to say the least, and yet, for some reason, this kid was attracted to me like flies to trash. I wish I could come up with a better analogy involving myself, but it is what it is. I wasn't mean to the kid, although there were times that I had to get on him to settle down or just to quit talking dirty in the cabin. As the week went on, Tommy seemed to mellow out, and that was nice. Still abrasive, but by the last 2 days of camp, he had simmered quite a bit. Now this is where things start to get a little weird. Actually, I'll call it what it is. It got downright creepy. On the second to last night of camp, we had a contest night. And one of the contests that was held was a soda chugging contest. The soda of choice? Mountain Dew. The contest was held at 8 p.m. and I was the winner. I slammed down more dews than a 90s kid playing Nintendo on a Friday night. I love that. What did I win? A sleepless night. Partly because of all the caffeine, and partly because of Tommy. So I'm laying in my bed and I can't even close my eyes. I'm wired. I decided to get up and go outside and read my Bible out at one of the benches roughly 20 feet in front of the cabin. There was a street lamp that stood right over the bench, and it was a beautiful night, so it seemed like great conditions to read some of God's Word right before trying to go back to bed. It wasn't long after I sat down that Tommy came outside and sat down next to me. I asked him what was going on, and he told me that he couldn't sleep. So I asked him what he wanted to talk about. He asked me if I believed in God, and I told him that I did. He then asked me if I believed in angels, to which I replied that I indeed did. That's when the train started to derail. Tommy started talking about all types of weird things. Violent stuff, about people he hated, about how he wanted to strangle his neighbor, hurting animals, how he had dreams that the devil was choking him or beating him up, and in the middle of all of this hateful talk, he would start to stammer and completely change his demeanor, like he had seen something that had really scared him. And he would even reach out for me frantically and ask me to tell him about God in heaven. So I would start talking to him about the love of God and good things, just trying to speak life and move away from the negativity. And then all of a sudden, it was like Tommy had forgotten where we were, or he was totally unaware that I was even talking, and he would break in with all of this hateful, evil stuff. We repeated the cycle a few times, and I was starting to get worn down. I was feeling really uneasy, and at this point, I was starting to see things in the shadows. Nothing really ominous, just a sign that I had been up for far too long, and I was starting to get tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. This is where total derailment happened. Tommy was in the middle of talking, and I was rubbing my eyes, and I remember that specifically because I remember hoping that I had just done something weird with my eyes and that I didn't actually see what I thought I saw. But as I took my hand away from my eyes, I looked out, and at the very edge of the darkness, just beyond the last bits of light cast by the street lamp, I saw what looked like a large, malnourished cat thing. It had no features. It was just a clump of pure darkness that was darker than all the darkness behind it. I couldn't tell you how big it was exactly. It just looked maybe dog-sized, but it was off. It was formed weird. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, and it was gone. Then I turned my head back to Tommy. He was sitting there pointing at the same spot that I saw that thing. The exact spot, and his face was pulling back into this inhuman smile. Almost like he wasn't controlling the muscles, like some invisible force had hooked its fingers into the kid's mouth and pulled his cheeks back for him. And he said, "Did you see that?" And with that horrendous smile on his face. I jumped up and I started running like hell towards the cabin. And I don't know if it was just anxiety in that moment or some force was actually at work on me, but it felt like I was in a dream where you're trying to run in pudding. Until I hit the door of the cabin. Then it was gone. One of my friends who was bunking with us, Steve, I knew he was getting ready to go off to college and become a preacher. So I grabbed him out of bed with all of the adrenaline-fueled strength I had. He woke up confused, and I yoinked him outside to talk to him about this kid and me. He asked me what was wrong, and all I could say was that, I don't know, there's just something wrong with Tommy. Steve talked with Tommy, who acted like he had no recollection of anything we talked about, and that he had just not gotten up and walked outside to talk with me and then wigged out. And at the end of it all, Steve just shrugged and said that he would have one of the counselors talk with him the next day. I actually fell asleep right after all of this, and the next day, everything was back to normal. Tommy was acting fine, and I didn't bring it up. I just figured that I had a momentary loss of my marbles due to all the soda. But that night after our last chapel meeting, I went out and was talking with some of my campers and a few of my friends. Afterwards, I started walking back to the cabin, and then I ran across my brother. He was crying, and not like kind of crying, he was openly weeping. I asked what was wrong, and after a bit, he choked out, Tommy, and trailed off. I immediately thought that Tommy had hurt my brother and then went into protection mode. Tell me where he is and I'll beat the tar out of him type stuff. But he said, no, that's not it. I found him staring off into the woods, and when I asked him what he was doing, he turned around and I don't know how to explain it other than his face wasn't his face. And that's all he would say. His face wasn't his face. It's something else. After that night, I never saw Tommy again. Neither did my brother. Last I heard, he had been in and out of jail, but that's all. To this day, my brother will not talk about that night. But if I bring it up, which is rare, he'll deflect, change the subject, or just outright leave. Once again, a huge thank you to Lakota from MYR Mediums for submitting in his true horror tale for me to read. And if you have a true spooky tale that's happened to you and you would like me to read it as a part of my sub-horror short series, please email it to conjuringcanvases@gmail.com. Check out the description box down below for Lakota's channel. And remember the rules of conjuring. Never play alone. Never play in a graveyard. And always say goodbye. Happy spooky season, Ghosties and Ghoulies.